So in 1789, I believe it was about a month after they stormed the Bastille, so one of the major events of the French Revolution, the National Assembly of France wrote the following Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. The representatives of the French people, organized as a national assembly, believing that the ignorance, neglect, or contempt of the rights of man are the sole cause of public calamities and of the corruption of governments, have determined to set forth in a solemn declaration the natural, unalienable, and sacred rights of man, in order that this declaration, being constantly before all the members of the social body, shall remind them continually of their rights and duties, in order that the acts of the legislative power, as well as those of the executive power, may be compared at any moment with the objects and purposes of all political institutions, and may thus be more respected. And lastly, in order that the grievances of the citizens, based hereafter upon simple and incontestable principles, shall tend to the maintenance of the Constitution and redound to the happiness of all. Therefore, the National Assembly recognizes and proclaims in the presence and under the auspices of the Supreme Being the following rights of man and the citizen. I want to give this document its due, but I also want to point out some very important differences between it and the Declaration of Independence, because you can hear the consonants, obviously, right? It comes from some of the same Enlightenment ideas. There's a similarity of spirit here, and that idea that they are unalienable, right? That we hear some echoes there, and that the government needs to be held accountable to people's rights, to the rights of man and of the citizen. All kind of along similar lines to the idea that all men are endowed by their creator. And even you get the sacred rights of man, as you do in Rousseau, and you get in the presence and under the auspices of the Supreme Being. So this is not, sometimes I may go overboard in my furor about the French Revolution, just like Burke is very passionate about it. I sort of follow meekly in his footsteps, and I get kind of angry about this stuff. So I might go overboard. I might say, like, this is these atheists tearing down churches. And they really did do some awful stuff. They confiscated church property. They killed people en masse. So I don't want to downplay that either. It truly was a horror. But you note that they haven't yet jettisoned this language of the Supreme Being. But what they don't do is speak in clear terms about where these rights come from. We're in the presence of the Supreme Being. These rights are sacred. But do they come from the state, or do they come from God? And the reason this is so important is because we are on our way to thinking about how it can be that the state can end up weighing the value of a human life, a terminal life, of a dying person, or a person who wants to die, or the life of an infant in the womb, right? How is it that the state can accrue to itself the power? The state can start out by saying that, all men are created equal, and then decide who lives or dies based on its estimation of their worth? Well, this is the fundamental problem with jettisoning natural right and natural law, and therefore the religious tradition altogether, is that if it's all positive law all the way down, that is, if the state gives you your rights, then of course the state can take them away. And if the state says you are equal to your fellow man, and if the state says that you have rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, well, then maybe the state can decide it has an interest in granting those rights to puppies and to robots, but not to 2-year-olds. And if you think I'm joking, we're going to get into some of this stuff later on, that in fact, people like Peter Singer are arguing that infants should and can be killed under quite a lot of circumstances, whereas dogs probably, more intelligent. So if you give this power to the state to decide, you will ultimately not be free. You will not be born free. You will not be any kind of absolutely free. You will be under the tyranny of a sovereign that gets to decide your rights. The only safe place to locate your rights intellectually is in God. They come from God if they come anywhere at all. Those inalienable rights must come from God. And one of the fatal flaws of this Declaration of the Rights of Man is it does not specify. It says they're sacred, right? But are we worshiping them, or are we worshiping the giver? And is the giver God? We're not told. It doesn't say, right? Under the auspices of the Supreme Being. Note how different that is from the Declaration of Independence. All men are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights.